I work in an auto parts factory making brake parts. It's not glamorous, but somebody has to do it, and I'm grateful for the job. My shift is from 4 p.m. to midnight, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. During that time, I operate this old, outdated machine. I'm required to wear safety glasses, earplugs, steel-toed boots, and a denim apron. Every day I meet my production goals, and if I'm lucky, at the end of the year I can go home and get a bonus. I've got a cozy 3-bedroom house, a lovely wife and 2 sons, both in elementary school after 12 years of marriage. Things were going pretty well. Until today. We have 5 workstations where we assemble the brake shoes. They all run on compressed air, and in 8 years, we haven't had any problems with the equipment. But today, in the middle of the shift, the compressed air system suddenly froze. The air we use for power. All of our machines have to be completely dry. It goes through filters and dehydrators, usually without a problem. But tonight the dehydrator system failed to get rid of the moisture it had collected. I'm no expert, but when moisture mixes with high press air, things freeze up and everything stops working. Instead of making us wait, they just sent the whole crew home without pay. Of course, it's like my whole day was ruined because the humidity screwed up the equipment, and when I walked into the bedroom, all I saw was a big hairy back bouncing up and down on my wife, Mary. I turned on the overhead light thinking she was just sleeping, but then I realized what was going on. What the hell, Danny? Why are you home? I expected her to be scared or sorry, but instead, she was just angry. What was the big deal? Don't act clueless. You know exactly what's going on. I'm sorry you had to walk in on this, but if you'd gotten home on time, none of this would have happened. He would never have been here, or I would never have seen him. The hairy guy turned around and gave me a smug look. Marcy half-heartedly covered up with the blankets. My mistake was trying to grab the guy. When he got off the bed, he was much bigger and standing up. I landed on the floor, struggling to breathe, and blacked out. Next thing I knew I was in the air getting my ribs taped. Marcy was sitting nearby looking disgusted. After the tech finished, Marcy and I were alone. Marcy, who the hell was that guy and why was he in our house? His name is Tony. He's a friend of mine, and I invited him over. You slept with him in our bed, with our kids sleeping nearby. Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made such a fuss, they wouldn't have woken up. I had to call my sister to watch them, so I could bring you here. What the hell was he doing there? How many times are you going to ask the same thing? We were close. Is that so hard to understand? Is this a regular thing, or was it just this one time? Tony and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months. We tried to keep it a secret from you. We don't usually come here, but I couldn't find a babysitter. Is it over now? No, it's not over. Danny, you're a good dad and husband, but Tony's amazing in bed. I don't see why we should stop just because you know, but I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or to the kids. It's not okay. It ends. Now, Danny, if you try to interfere with my thing with Tony, you're going to regret it. It will happen again if you try anything, and everyone will know you couldn't handle it. Our friends, neighbors, even your family will know what a loser you are. Your coworkers will call you pathetic. Think twice, Danny. Your life will be a nightmare. Even our sons will be ashamed of you. Don't you care what people think? You'd make yourself look bad just to hurt me. I will if I have to, but I'm pretty sure you won't risk it. Tony thinks you're weak, and I agree, you'll have to deal with that. Danny boy, who is this guy anyway? Where does he work? He doesn't, Danny. He owns Continental Classics, that fancy car dealership on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wanted to go to but never did. That's all, Danny. He's richer, smarter, and better in bed than you, and it seems he's tougher and better in a fight too. If he's so great, why not just marry him? That's why you're still here. Honey, Tony doesn't like kids, and I'm not giving up mine to be with him. You get to play house and be a dad while Tony gets all the fun. Can't you see I'm supposed to be okay with this? You don't have a choice. Either you deal with it or everyone will know what a loser you are. Oh, and I'll move your stuff into the guest room. No need for us to share a bed now that everything's out in the open. I watched Marcy leave and felt a little relieved. Just curious who took care of the kids when you were out with Tony. Usually Karen took care of them, but sometimes I dropped them off at your parents' house. Oh, and by the way, Karen introduced me to Tony. I made a mental note to thank Karen when Marcy left to let me go the next morning. Marcy wasn't there. I had the choice of calling someone or taking a cab. I chose the taxi. The kids were at school and Marcy was nowhere to be found at home. My clothes and personal items were piled on the guest bed. I figured Todd and Terry would have questions about the setup, but I planned to let Marcy explain. It didn't take long, maybe an hour, to sort out my new living space. During that time, all kinds of thoughts swirled around in my head. There was no way this was going to go the way Marcy wanted. First thing I did was go down to the basement and find my old phone recorder. It only worked with the landline, but I had no choice. Marcy used her cell phone most of the time. It took about 20 minutes to set it up and hide it behind some old paint cans. It was a start. I felt like crap, but I was well enough to go back to work. They offered me some painkillers, but I wasn't keen on taking them and then operating machinery. I opted for some strong Tylenols instead. One thing Marcy totally misjudged was my bond with my work buddies. I told them what had happened the night before, and they had all kinds of ideas, some good, some not so good. It was comforting to know that my friends had my back when I needed it. We had an 8-hour shift ahead of us, and each of us was determined to brainstorm ways to make things right. We took a break for dinner in the middle of our shift. Does anyone have a plan? I asked. Glenn spoke first. I don't have a plan, but I have a cousin who works for the guy who does all the car detailing. Word is he can't stand the boss. If you need information on the business or anything else, he's your guy who could come in handy. Glenn, anyone else? Danny, I've got some magnums. You can borrow any of them. They're unregistered, so don't worry about it. Thanks, Barry, but this is a bit much for me. Well, then you don't want to hear my idea. We laughed at Barry's comment. Come on, Freddie, what's your idea? I asked. I thought we could tie him to a tree with his legs spread and light a fire between them, like the old Indian style. Everyone thought Freddie's idea was great, but we all decided against it. Kyle was the only one who hadn't spoken up, so we waited for him to share while we ate lunch. What? Why is everyone staring at me? Yeah, I have an idea, but it's a little out there. Let's hear it, Kyle. I remember hearing about this prison in Arizona where they made all the bad guys wear pink jumpsuits. It was to humiliate them. So you're saying we should put him in a pink jumpsuit, but wouldn't he just take it off? I was thinking maybe we could get to him, tie him up, and then spray paint him pink all over. That might work, but wouldn't he figure out who did it? We'd have to knock him out first, then keep him tied up until he found the pills, or maybe hit him over the head. What's your plan? I can get a taser, We can sneak up on him and zap him, but that sounds easier said than done. How do we catch him alone, and how do we get close without him? I know I don't have all the solutions. I just thought it was an idea. The buzzer went off signaling another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down for the night, so the other guys helped me out to even things out. Marcy was already in bed when I got home. At least, she kept her promise not to bring that idiot into our house. Have you ever tried this thing? Nope, not yet. Everybody wanted to be the guinea pig. The answer was just a chorus of groans. No one had any new ideas, but they were all willing to support whatever I came up with. It felt good to have some supportive friends. Things were typical at home when I arrived. It was going to be a short night for me. Working the graveyard shift messes with your sleep, especially on weekends. I was up earlier than usual. Todd and Terry were looking forward to a trip to Chuck E. Cheese's. Marcy didn't seem to mind, especially when I mentioned we'd be out all day. Danny, I'm going to need you to take a couple of days off the week after next. Tony's buddy Wally is visiting from Detroit, and we're taking a 3-night cruise to Cancun. Can you handle that? Or should we ask your folks? Wait, going on a cruise with 2 guys sounds sketchy even for you. Don't be rude, Danny. It's not like you. Wally will be sharing a room with Karen. They've been pals for years. Well, that changes everything. I said sarcastically that I'd owe Karen big time for this. I didn't know what to do next. Most of the ideas the guys and I discussed were like childish pranks. It felt about as useful as leaving a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed real revenge. By noon, I was up. The kids were at school, and I could hear Marcy moving around the house. After a quick shower and shave, I headed out the door. Husband, no kiss for your wife. Marcy stood by the sink, hand on her hip, smirking. I walked out without a word. Her sarcastic comment didn't deserve a response. I needed lunch and some time to myself. The rest of the afternoon was spent trying to figure out what I could do to Marcy's lover without getting myself in too much trouble. I had work tonight and needed to get ready. I decided to stop eating at home. It was the only time I got to spend with the boys, but I couldn't stand Marcy's cooking anymore before I knew it was time for work. Things were normal until dinner time. Danny, I've got the stun gun in the car. I don't know if it'll come in handy, but at least you'll have it for self-defense. Kyle seemed pleased with himself. Don't forget to grab it before you go home. I started the day way too early to kill time before Chucky's opened. We went to the nearby Hobby Lobby. The boys were old enough to handle the plastic models on the shelves. The finished products weren't impressive, but they had a blast. While they explored the model boxes, I wandered around in amazement at the variety of items available for creative homemakers. If only Marcy had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla, but it was too late. Now my eyes lit up when I found rows and rows of designer spray paint cans. Among them were 6 beautiful pink cans. They didn't have as much paint as Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were pink, and that was all that mattered. Todd chose a monster truck kit, and Terry chose a tugboat. Plastic tugboat models were new to me. Before I left, I grabbed a package of 10 large plastic wire wraps. They looked like they'd do the job. By then Chuck E. Cheese was open. The kids scarfed down 2 pizzas and spent about 4 hours there before they burned out. We grabbed some cheap bread and headed over to Pandora Park. The ducks gobbled it up in 10 minutes, but we stuck around for a few more hours before heading over to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were happy to have us over for dinner that night. Todd and Terry spent most of the night glued to the TV, so I took the opportunity to fill Dad in on what was going on with Marcy. It dawned on me that I had shared this situation with others before Marcy could. She was threatening to do the same. I was already doing it. That made her threat almost meaningless. Dad assured me that he would take care of the boys no matter what. That was a relief. I didn't want the boys to get hurt by any of this. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to tell her we were staying at my parents' house for the night. After a hearty breakfast at IHOP, I got her voicemail. We returned home to find Marcy still in bed. I immediately fired up the lawn mower and started mowing the backyard near the bedrooms. Todd and Terry were eager to work on their models despite the beautiful weather outside, so I let them. I decided to dedicate the whole day to yard work. There was a lot of trimming and pruning to do. Progress was slower than usual because I found myself stopping to chat with the neighbors. Even though I had hedge clippers, I borrowed a pair from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife, Mary, was known as one of the biggest gossips in the neighborhood. I told Mike that there might be unfamiliar cars parked near the house because Marcy would be having some male friends over. Everything should be fine unless they get too loud or rowdy. If that happens, just call the police. It was hard for me to keep track of things since I was working nights. Larry Finley was on the board of the local church. I borrowed a spark plug wrench from him and apologized for Marcy's recent erratic behavior. Of course, he wanted to know what I meant. Larry was even more of a gossip than Mary Fielding. In 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and finished work about 4 p.m. After a quick shower, I treated myself to a meal at Rosie's Cantina, choosing the most expensive item on the menu. I can't tell you what it was, but it was fantastic. I spent the rest of the evening with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already filled him in on the situation. I crashed on his couch for the night. My wife had this grand plan. She thought she could control me by threatening to expose me as a wretch. If I didn't accept and support her cheating, she would make my life a living hell. It was a clever idea, but it was full of holes. Within a week, I'd already told everyone. That pretty much rendered her threat useless, plus I managed to make her look even worse than she imagined. The next afternoon, I stopped by the house to change for work, and there was Marcy, seething with anger. "What the hell did you tell the neighbors?" "Karen said you've been spreading rumors that I run a brothel here at night." "Come on, Marcy, that's nonsense. I just mentioned to them that you might have male visitors while I'm at work, and they shouldn't make a fuss about it." "Well, it's not like that. Who else have you been seeing?" I told everyone that I thought it would be better if they heard it from me first. "I didn't say anything to your parents or sisters, although you might want to talk to them before they get wind of it." "Damn it, Danny, you're making me look like a fool." "Sorry, honey, but I got to go to work, got to hang out with the guys a little bit before heading out." The hardest part was not getting the quality time I wanted with them. Glenn had some good news. Continental Classics closed at 9 on Thursday, so Tony could do the payroll in peace. Even the cleaners were gone. Kyle showed me how to use the taser. No volunteers for testing, although the plan was coming together. If I got caught, and I probably would, I'd go to jail. Time didn't care. Tony DeMarco had to be embarrassed. If I got arrested, I'd make sure the whole story was in the papers and on TV. Any publicity like that would either ruin him or piss him off enough to do something stupid. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change. I haven't eaten there since that first day. Finally, Thursday came and I arranged for my truck's battery to die, so Kyle picked me up off the ground. The supervisor didn't bother the brake guys much as long as we made our quotas and kept the quality up. They left us alone. What helped me was the OSHA rules for the job with the apron, gloves, and welding goggles. We all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back. The guys would take turns covering my station. One station would be empty, but no one really cared. Bathroom breaks were normal and unobserved. The key was to make it look like I never left. I entered Continental Classics through the service door and went straight to the bathroom around 9 o'clock. Someone made a quick check before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and stepped out of the bathroom into a dimly lit office area. His desk, facing away from the door, focused on an old adding machine with paper tape. It seemed simpler than I thought. He was busy. He didn't hear me coming. I aimed the taser right at Tony's back and did it again, afraid he'd turn around this time. He twitched a little and then relaxed perfectly. I secured 2 plastic cable wraps to each limb and found an old tie to use as a blindfold. He was surprisingly cooperative. I wheeled his chair to the glass window overlooking the showroom, where he'd be on full display when the staff arrived in the morning. The pink paint wasn't holding as well as I'd hoped. It soaked into his clothes quickly. It took several coats to get the effect. I barely had enough paint, but I got the job done. He looked quite fetching in pink when I was done. I carefully packed everything back up. I thought Tony would wake up during my little decorating session, but he didn't stir. I planned to remove the tie before I left, but he still hadn't woken up, even though I was on schedule. I wanted him to be awake before I left. After 5 minutes of waiting, I began to get anxious. I tried to feel for a pulse, but couldn't find one. Maybe the latex gloves were blocking it. I took one off and tried again, but still no pulse. I even tried to find a pulse on his neck like they do on TV, but I had no luck. When I removed the blindfold and touched his eye with the tip of a pencil, he didn't react at all. It was alarming. I panicked. I put the latex glove back on and wiped down anything I might have touched. I kept the necktie in my pocket and cut off the plastic straps. Removing them revealed spots of pink paint that made him look like a pink raccoon with white skin underneath. After making sure I hadn't missed anything, I went back to work on the way I dumped everything, including the tea, in a storm drain. 10 minutes later, I was back at my station making brake shoes. No one seemed to notice. I was gone. When the shift ended, I told the guys what had happened. They didn't seem concerned. Freddie was impressed. Kyle drove me home, and we both remembered the time he dropped me off. I didn't get my usual amount of sleep. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy barged into my room. "What have you been doing? You little idiot?" I just turned around and looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Tony's gone. Karen called and said they found him in his office this morning. I think you had something to do with this and you're gonna pay for it." That was the second time she called me an idiot in 5 minutes. It was clear. I wasn't going to sleep. I got out of bed, went to the bathroom, took a long shower and shaved slowly. I even put on some aftershave just to annoy my lovely wife. I didn't even make it to the coffee pot. There was a tall black man in the living room talking to Marcy. He had short hair and was wearing a dark suit. Marcy had called the cops, no doubt. I shook my head and went into the kitchen to make my first cup of coffee of the day. Marcy had a mischievous grin on her face as I settled into my favorite chair. The unexpected guest followed suit. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Darnell Green with an E. I'm here about Anthony DeMarco's death last night. Your wife mentioned a disagreement between the two of you last week. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" "Sure, but not here." What do you have in mind? Let's talk in your office, not at my place. Is that okay? I noticed Marcy's frown, probably because she thought she'd be part of it, your car or mine. Mr. Mercer, I have some errands to run, so I'll meet you there. Any particular office? Second floor, room 206. Take a right off the elevator. See you soon. Marcy was boiling as I slipped on my shoes. I left. The unfinished coffee in the sink, then a grin at her on my way out. Looks like you're getting what you wanted, sweetheart. What are you talking about? What's going on, Danny? 10 minutes later, I was sitting with Detective Green on the second floor of the City Hall for the next hour. Detective Green asked all the necessary questions, and I answered accordingly. He touched delicately on the affair without dwelling on it or making a big deal out of it. I admitted that I had a reason to be upset, but made it clear that I hadn't acted on it. It was a serious situation, but I tried to stay friendly without being snarky. I think he appreciated that I cooperated even though I couldn't provide much insight. The most surprising part was learning that Tony had died of a heart problem. He had a pacemaker installed a few years ago, which apparently didn't mix well with the taser. You could tell by the marks on his neck. I felt conflicted about Tony's death, partly sad and partly relieved. Detective Green reminded me not to leave town and mentioned that he'd check out my alibi. It was odd to need an alibi, but it was a thrill. We parted on good terms, and I felt that Green was on my side, which was reassuring. After a quick meal, I caught up on the TV news. They were reporting on the death of a local businessman, noting that he had no known relatives in the A area. I withdrew all the money from our bank accounts and had a nice breakfast when I got home. Marcy wasn't there. It took me about 30 minutes to move my stuff back into the master bedroom and hers into the guest room. The guest room was pretty cramped, with only a small closet and dresser. I piled her things on the bed and left it for her to sort through. I checked the phone recorder in the basement, but there wasn't anything of note. I gathered all of our financial and insurance documents, along with other important papers. Luckily, Marcy's Volvo was in my name, which made things easier. I put everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck and called work to take 2 weeks off. A few hours later, Marcy came home. She seemed surprised to see me there. It was time to straighten things out. I grinned and led her into the guest room. What is all this? Who do you think you are? She replied with a grin. Tell me what's going on, Marcy. I'll be in the master bedroom from now on. You better get the guest room. Start putting your clothes away. Anything left out until dinner will be thrown out, got it? I can't fit all my stuff in this tiny closet, and I'm not staying in this room anyway. What do you mean by tossed? If it doesn't fit, you don't need it. That doesn't work. Danny, whatever game you're playing, it's not going to work. You're in trouble. You better start getting organized. Ask me more questions later. Bastard, that's the third time she's called me today. She must be onto something. While Marcy was busy in the guest room, I dumped her purse on the kitchen table and took my time sorting through it. I grabbed her cell phone and car keys first, then her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash from her wallet. I left everything else. Next, I retrieved her car title from the pickup truck and drove her Volvo across town to a friend's car lot. I sold it to him for a decent price with the understanding that he would sell it wholesale out of town, and even after paying off the loan, I pocketed a few thousand. I was on my way to Taco Bell for lunch. My cell phone rang. You idiot, where's my phone? And car. Marcy's angry voice came over the house phone. It was a good test. I could check the recorder when I got home. Sorry, honey, I needed money for a lawyer to defend me against the murder charge. I'll get you another car when I get out of jail. I hung up and turned off the cell phone. After that conversation, I realized that hiring a lawyer was a must, regardless of the outcome. I wasn't going to stay married, but that would have to wait. It was my turn to order. Todd and Terry were home, so when I returned, I went straight to my sons and completely ignored Marcy, although I couldn't help but notice her displeasure. The boys were excited to show me the models they had made. As Marcy began to prepare dinner, I strolled down the hall to the guest room. All of my clothes were neatly laid out on the bed, and Marcy's were back in the master bedroom. I chuckled to myself but decided not to argue. She was stubborn and determined right now. Marcy called the boys to wash up for dinner, and I went to the guest room to unpack my things again, as much as I wanted to throw all her stuff out. She felt too immature tonight. I treated myself to Red Lobster. Money wasn't an issue, since I had cash left over after paying the divorce lawyer's bail. The shrimp and lobster combo was delicious, but the cheese rolls were still my favorite. After finishing my meal, I turned my cell phone back on, hoping for a call from work or Detective Green. Instead, it was my wife, Danny. How am I supposed to go grocery shopping? We need milk and a few other things. I'll take you when I get home. Let's try to do our shopping on Saturdays when I'm off work. I'd feel better if you didn't go alone. Oh, I've got another call. I have to go. We'll talk when I get home. Kyle called next. Detective Green interviewed the entire crew, both individually and as a group. Everyone's stories matched. Tom Tingle, the floor manager, was particularly supportive. He insisted there was no way I could have missed work. He kept a close eye on everyone and could vouch for me being there all night. I knew I wasn't that slick. If some investigator wanted to prove that I destroyed Tony DeMarco, they probably could. It seemed no one really cared. I made it home just in time to put the boys to bed. Marcy was on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cola from the fridge and settled into my recliner. The TV was off, so I figured it would be a good time for Marcy and me to catch up. So, Marcy, how's the plan going to make me look weak and pathetic? That ended the conversation before it got started. Marcy finished her wine, got up, and went to her bedroom. I thought she wanted to talk. Guess I was wrong. I grabbed my beer and went to check the recorder. The first call was to her sister. No secrets there. It seemed Marge knew all about the affair with Tony and was fully behind Marcy. That was good to know. The next call was to Marcy's mother, and it was a little different. Mom had no idea what was going on. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was just a friend of Karen's, and that I was jealous because I'd been trying to hook up with Karen for years. Tony gave me a lecture about it, and I got upset. She didn't say outright that I dumped him, but she definitely implied it. She tried to call the cell phone company to replace the phone. I tried, but had no luck. Next, she called the DMV to report her missing driver's license, and they advised her to report it to the police. Then she contacted the bank to get a replacement credit card, but they told her the account was closed. I have to give her credit. She kept busy. The last message on the machine was to Karen, even though Karen lived nearby. Using the phone instead of meeting up was an odd choice, but it worked in my favor. From this call, I learned two important things. Wally was still coming in from Detroit, and Marcy was planning to lay low until he arrived. The guys and I were up bright and early. The next day, We left the house before Marcy woke up and returned after lunch. Marcy insisted that I drive her to the grocery store since she didn't have a car or license that night while she cooked dinner. I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived and called Marcy immediately. Their conversation was quite fascinating. He believed everything Marcy told him and promised revenge. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, and he wasn't going to let this go. He gave Marcy his contact information and told her to call him the next day. Marcy then excitedly called Karen to express her happiness. It was hard to believe that this was the same woman I'd been married to all these years. The change was sudden and complete. I didn't realize my actions were so serious. Aside from dealing with her lover, I grabbed a burger before going to bed. The lawn needed mowing again, so I had a good reason to stay away from Marcy. The next day, around 11, Marcy's parents came to take the boys for a sleepover. I didn't know about it before, but I decided not to object. Tomorrow was a school day, and Grandma Wilcox assured me they'd be back on time. I was anxious to check the phone recorder, but first, I grabbed some lunch since I missed breakfast. After a quick shower, I went to Denny's. Marcy didn't mention that I didn't eat at home anymore. Marcy and Wall. They were hatching a plan to get back at Tony for his death. It all seemed kind of silly, especially since I was in on it. After Marcy and I hit the hay, Wally would sneak in through the sliding door on the back deck. She assured him it would be unlocked. If all went according to plan, it would look like a burglary gone wrong. Both Marcy and Karen called 911 when they heard the noises. It may sound silly, but then I remembered that I hadn't changed the beneficiaries on my insurance policies. As I left, I sarcastically blew my wife a kiss, and she blew me off. I had dinner with my parents and hung out there for the evening. Before I left, I borrowed Dad's tool. The short-barreled 20 gauge would be perfect for the occasion. Marcy was in bed when I got home. Her light on, probably reading. The only call on the recorder was from Karen bragging about her afternoon with Wally. She assured Marcy that she'd be ready for later that night before signing off. I didn't want to off Wally, just slow him down. I didn't want to knock off Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have a weak heart like Tony. I wanted to see if Marcy had left the back deck door unlocked, but I was afraid Wally might spot me, so I stripped down to my shorts and messed up the bed covers. I wanted a cup of coffee, but there was none, so I settled for a Coke. I waited in my recliner with my cell phone by my side. He didn't show up until after midnight. When I saw him on the deck, I called 911 and reported an intruder. I made sure to say I feared for my life and didn't hang up. The patio door opened silently, and there was a wall. I waited until he was inside and then did this. I aimed low so as not to hit him accidentally. The first shot knocked him back onto the deck, and the second knocked him over the side of the deck, breaking the railing. I knew he was alive because he was howling. The rock salt must have hurt like hell. The Magnum was louder than I expected in the house. My ears were ringing like crazy. I turned on the lights, and in a second Marcy was in the living room screaming. I couldn't make out her words. I went to check on Wall-E and found a Magnum with a silencer on the floor. Marcy kept screaming, so I pointed it at her, and she stopped and ran away. Looks like Wally broke his ankle in the fall. Some guys have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first cop car pulled up. There wasn't much talk. I put the tool on the ground to make it clear. I gestured to the phone, and one of the officers told the 911 operator that everything was okay. They asked if anyone else was home, so I mentioned that Marcy was in the bedroom. They brought her out, but it turned out to be a mistake. She just kept talking, and despite our best efforts to calm her down, it didn't work. Finally, a large female officer escorted her outside. I noticed Karen and several other neighbors outside. I smiled at her and made a throat-cutting gesture. She hurried off without smiling back. The ambulance arrived for Wall-E when Detective Green showed up. He grinned when he saw me, and I couldn't help but grin back. It wasn't to be cheeky. I just couldn't help it. The officer took Marcy back inside so she could get dressed. She was a little calmer. After we got dressed, we all went to the police station. I asked for separate cars, so Detective Green let me ride with him. We didn't chat on the way downtown, but he looked over and smiled again when Green let me go. It was already daylight. Despite our short chat of about 30 minutes. They kept me there all night, and I felt like I was in Guantanamo with all that coffee. They made me drink. A police car drove me home, though I was a little disappointed not to find the house blocked off with yellow tape. It looked like nothing had happened, not even a crack in the GL sliding door from the rock salt. I guess Wally took the brunt of it. I figured it would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I crashed into bed and didn't wake up until after lunch. After relieving myself, I stumbled into the kitchen to find Detective Green sipping coffee and reading the paper. He must have made the coffee while I was asleep, because I had had my fill the night before, opting for a large glass of orange juice. I sat down across from him, not sure how he got in. "You're a cool cat, Mr. Mercer," he remarked without looking up from the paper, unsure of how to respond. I remained silent, unsure if he was joking. He finished his coffee. "Detective Green, I need a shower, a shave, and some food. I'll treat you unless it violates some police protocol." "Take your time, Danny. I'm in no hurry." Lunch consisted of 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Green even joined me for a beer. We sat in silence for a while, and it started to feel heavy. "You want to ask me something, don't you, Mr. Mercer?" "Kind of funny. I was thinking the same thing about you." The detective motioned to the waiter for 2 more drinks. "I have been throwing questions at you all night. Now it's your turn. First of all, where's my wife?" "We still have her. Charges will be filed." "I finished my beer this afternoon." "Your wife's people got her a lawyer." "I didn't expect that now." I had a lot more questions, but the more I asked, the more I risked revealing. I decided it was best to let it go. It was good to know that Marcy's family was there for her CU. I certainly wasn't. "I don't have any more questions, Detective Green, but if you want to get something off your chest, feel free to spill the beans anytime." He took a big gulp of beer and chuckled, not too loud, but definitely a laugh. "Here's another thing. You didn't catch any of the conversations between your wife and Mr. Williams. Did you or did you not record them?" "You mean Wally, right?" That got me a little chuckle. "If I had such a recording, would you want it?" "I'm not sure." "Not yet. If things go like this, I guess it won't matter. But if one of them gets it, a sharp lawyer might come in handy. If I had a tape, wouldn't that get me in hot water?" "You're onto something. Just trying to make my job a little easier. I'll see what I can do without a tape that may or may not exist." I gave a little nod of thanks. "Danny boy thinks I should take you home. Your boys will be back from school soon, and they need their daddy." We got home just as Todd and Terry got off the school bus. They came over and I introduced them to my new detective buddy. They wanted to see his badge. Everything seemed fine until Green leaned over and asked who built the tugboat and who built the monster truck. "I built the truck." Todd exclaimed proudly, puffing out his chest. "I made the tugboat. I wanted to show it to you," Terry said just as proudly. "Maybe I'll take a look at it next time," Green said as he walked away grinning like he knew something about the pink paint. I felt trapped with nothing to do that night. We ordered pee. The boys didn't ask about their mother. After dinner, Marce's dad called and asked for help bailing her out of jail. I politely declined. He may not have fully understood the situation, but at least he was trying to help. I asked where she was staying. He hesitated, then said she'd be with them. We packed up Marce's things and dropped them off. When we got back, I saw a U-Haul at Karen's. The next morning, she was gone. Marcy never contacted me. I had to read the paper every day to keep up. It felt like I was being deliberately kept out of the loop. No one bothered to inform me. There was no process. Marcy blamed everything on Wally, while he said it was her idea. They both ended up pleading guilty. Marcy got 3 to 5 years for planning a murder, and Wally got 5 to 10 years for attempting one. The feds got involved because of Wally's silencer, but they decided to wait until after his first sentence to file charges. Detective Green never mentioned the tape again. He didn't need it. Karen disappeared without a trace. Dad was happy to have his tool back and joked that I could borrow it again if I needed it. I served Marcy with divorce papers as soon as her prison term began, and she didn't fight. It seemed she wanted nothing to do with me, since we hadn't spoken since the night I did that to Wall-E. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents. Since I couldn't work and take care of the boys on my own, my coworkers welcomed me back, and although they offered me a change to the day shift, I declined. I took the boys to visit their mother at my women's prison. Each month, I'd wait in the car as they visited, usually for less than an hour. Sometimes they'd meet outside when the weather was nice, and I'd watch from a distance. I didn't ask about their visits, and I asked them not to tell me anything. It seemed to work well for all of us. Everything was going smoothly until I got the call. "Hello, is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes, I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green suggested that I contact you. There are some things we need to talk about." "I know Detective Green, but why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony Marco was my brother." "Oh no, just when I thought I was done with all this mess, something like this had to come up. I don't think this is a good idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't help you." I ended the call before she could say anything else. 2 days later, she called back. "Daniel, I'd really like you to meet me. There are things I need to tell you. Detective Green mentioned that you're reasonable. Where would you like to meet?" "I'd prefer the car showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable is fine." It took me a while to figure out what to say. "I'll meet you at the showroom Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I'll bring my 2 sons. They like to look at old cars." I didn't know what she was planning, but I felt safer with the boys in a public place. I wasn't using them as a shield, but I thought she'd be less likely to try anything if they were there. I didn't know what kind of grudge this woman might have if she was Tony's sister. She must be Italian. If she was Italian, she could be fiery. I thought I was thinking too much and needed a beer. I called Detective Green and asked him what was going on. He laughed and said to meet her in Stress. Easy for him to say he didn't kill your brother. Continental Classics was a big place. Besides the main showroom, they had 2 big buildings in the back for cars that needed work. I was surprised to see that they were having a grand opening. I wasn't expecting that when we got there. There were a lot of things I didn't understand. Terry and Todd were torn between the cars and the free stuff. The first thing we noticed was the smell of popcorn. A guy in a clown suit was handing out bags of it. There was a soda machine and another clown with a hot dog cart. The guys wouldn't need lunch today. It wasn't hard to spot Angela Hawkins. I recognized her immediately as she walked purposefully toward me. She had all the Italian features, dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin, and a curvy figure. Tony was tall, but Angela was short and stocky, and as she came closer, I felt a little nervous, especially when I saw her daughter standing next to her. The girl, about 10 years old, looked just like her mother, but with lighter hair and no curves. It seemed that we both used our children as a kind of shield. She held out her hand in a friendly gesture. Daniel Mercer Wright. It felt natural to shake her hand. I've always wanted to say that, like in the Dr. Livingston movie. She said with a smile, though she seemed a little uncomfortable, which reassured me since I was quiet. She continued to speak. This is my daughter. Carla greeted us with a smile. Todd said his name while Terry eagerly shook her hand. Carla, why don't you show the boys around while I talk to their dad? Terry followed Carla into the showroom, and Todd headed for the hot dog stand. It seemed like a good start. We can talk down here or go up to my office. Your choice. I think the office would be fine. Those were my immediate words. As we made our way to the stairs leading up, I noticed a few employees looking in our direction and chatting among themselves. Angela saw it too and chuckled at my discomfort. The salesmen wearing blue bowling shirts for the opening stood out, but instead of focusing on the customers, they seemed more interested in me. At the other end, a guy flashed a big smile and a thumbs up. I smiled back, but felt a little uncomfortable. Did Detective Green tell you anything about my situation? I didn't answer. I just shook my head to indicate that he hadn't. I won't bore you with my life story, but you should know something. Tony was my brother, my only family. When he died without a will, I inherited his business. The executor took a piece, but I still got more than I expected. It was good to hear that someone benefited from the ordeal. As she spoke, I noticed her pierced ears and wedding ring. A small silver cross hung from her neck, though I was more distracted by her cleavage as I began to refocus. She interrupted, Mr. Mercer, are you with me? It was a playful question. Her smile confirmed it. Sorry, I got distracted. I was just admiring your crucifix and reminding myself to keep eye contact. She tapped my arm playfully. Want a beer? That sounds good. There was a small refrigerator next to the desk, and she had to bend over to get the drinks. One moment I was staring at her cleavage, and the next I was facing a beautiful butt. She wasn't just explaining. It felt like she was trying to charm me. Maybe it wasn't intentional, but it was definitely working. She opened the can and handed it to me, making sure not to bend over too much. We both took a few sips without saying a word. Well, Angela, I'm glad things worked out for you, but I'm not sure why I'm here. I should get back to the boys before they get worried. It'd be better if you called me Angela. Can I call you Danny? So are we done here? No, not yet. Just sit tight until I'm done. Detective Green said you'd get it. I kept quiet. I figured the sooner I zipped it up, the sooner she'd wrap it up. Tony was a jerk. He was rotten, and he got what he deserved. Strange as it sounds. I wanted to thank you. It felt like a setup. Was that detective setting me up? Was the room Bud, or was it her who could easily have a bug hidden in her bra? Damn it. I found myself staring at her cleavage again. Are you wired or recording this? Of course not. Why would I do that? I finished my beer, still unsure. Maybe I should check on the guys. I don't want them to get into any trouble. Just stay where you are. She sounded pretty determined. I never had much love for Tony. About 3 years ago, my husband died in an accident. He had no life insurance, and the guy who hit him had no insurance. I had no job skills and a daughter to raise. Tony was my only family, so I asked for help. He helped with some of the funeral expenses, but that was it. He wouldn't even return my phone calls. So you're saying that his passing was a blessing for you? Yes, and it seems like it was for you as well. Maybe we should both count our blessings and leave it at that. Angela grinned and finished her beer. You don't want to talk about it anymore, huh? I nodded and started to get up. I need a favor from you. You're the only one who can help me. What can I do for you? I want you to join my team as a general manager. You're crazy. I don't know anything about the car business, especially high-end cars like you have down there. I know I've got people for that. What do you need me for? Angela seemed a little nervous. She looked at her feet, then at the walls, as if searching for the right words. Did you notice how my staff looked at you when you came into the office with me? Yes, they didn't seem very friendly. They all think you're the one who took out Tony, and not only that, you made a joke out of it. They used to be afraid of Tony, and now they're afraid of you. It's like they respect you out of fear. You know what I mean? They don't respect you. No, they're going to try to take advantage of me left and right, and I can't do a damn thing about it. I'm not tough or smart enough to keep them in line. What can I do? Just be here most of the time. Eventually we'll both get the hang of this business and be able to control things. But until then, I need you to intimidate them. I'm a nice guy, Angela. That's why Tony and my wife thought they could push me around. She seemed more comfortable now. Well, it didn't work out so well for them, did it? For some reason? I found that funny and laughed a little for the next half hour. Angela and I worked out the details. She had no problem offering me better pay and benefits than I was getting at the factory, and if things didn't work out, I could always go back, but to be honest, I didn't really want to go back. I wanted this new job to work out. Todd didn't look too good when we went back downstairs, probably from all those hot dogs and sodas on the other side. Terry was having a great time. He seemed more interested in talking to Carla than looking at the cars, which was a positive sign. Todd got sick in the truck on the way home and skipped dinner. I started my new job that Monday, and things went exactly as Angela said they would. I was surprised at how quickly I found my way around the place. I became friendly with some of the staff and soon had insiders keeping an eye on the floor. The guy in the blue shirt who gave me that big smile the first day was Glenn's cousin, and he became my biggest supporter. Most of the employees wanted the business to succeed and were more than happy to point out any troublemakers. Angela let me do the firing, and I found that I kind of enjoyed it. I was really living up to my reputation. Detective Green stopped by for coffee a few times, but our conversations were usually casual and pleasant. Eventually, I got him to open up a little. 3 years ago, I was a cop down in Philly, came in one day, and found my wife in bed with my boss. The department fired me, so I got a job here a week later before I left. I made sure that the jerk who was with my wife got fired too. I didn't press him for more information. It was his personal matter. At least I understood why he seemed to be on my side. The boys promised not to tell their mother about my new job during the visit. They grumbled a bit about the long drive, but they understood that there was no way around it. I felt It was important for Marcy to see her sons, not so much for her sake, but to rub some salt in the wound. Yeah, I know it's not the best way to involve your kids, but I got a twisted satisfaction out of it. Angela and I spent more time together, both at work and off. One weekend, the boys insisted that I take her and Carla to Noble's Grove. Usually, though, we stayed closer to home. Our living situations made any chance of romance difficult. I was definitely interested in getting closer to Angela, but it wasn't convenient. I was still living with my parents and the boys, while Angela and Carla were in a small studio apartment and the business was doing better than expected. Angela started talking about buying a house. She spent a lot of time online looking for the right one. My wake-up call came when she mentioned she wanted a 4-bedroom place. Danny, I think it's important for each of the boys to have his own room. It's better to do it now than later, don't you think? Of course. I realized it was a loaded question, and it dawned on me that Angela saw me as more than just an employee. The idea of a possible romance became more promising. Yeah, I like that idea too, and I think a split-bedroom plan would be smart. I don't want the boys too close to the master bedroom, I said before I left the office. Angela had a small smile on her face as I left. Our relationship was strange. Although we had never been close or even close, I felt closer to her than I had to Marcy in 12 years. 2 days later, after my divorce from Marcy was finalized, we all went to Red Lobster to celebrate. The kids didn't know why we were celebrating, but Angela did. Later at the apartment, while the kids were watching a pay-per-view movie, Angela kissed me in the kitchen. We hugged and giggled a bit until Carla walked in. "Oops, sorry, Mom," she said, then added with a smile, "It's time to go back to the living room." Carla whispered something to Terry, and they both smiled. Angela and I behaved ourselves for the rest of the evening, but I was excited about what might happen next. The next day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I took a long lunch break and returned to the apartment. We both had a lot of pent-up energy to release. We didn't go back to work until just before quitting time, after which we often had long lunches together, and Angela got serious about finding a house. Detective Green visited regularly, usually for casual conversation, but sometimes to admire the cars. He especially liked a Studebaker Hawk, once owned by Roger Ebert, the film critic. Angela gave him a good deal on it. "Danny, I need you to take me to see Marcy." It came out of the blue. Even though we didn't visit Marcy that often, she never seemed to mind. "Is there a particular reason I need closure?" she replied. I never really understood what that meant. I knew the words, but the idea confused me. "Want me to go with you?" "Just drive me there. You don't have to be there when I talk to her." We arrived at Muni on a warm, sunny fall day. The inmate visits were outside, so I parked near the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela walked into the exercise yard and sat down at a table. They were talking and smiling like old friends. Things took a turn. After 5 minutes, Marcy's smile faded and was replaced by a scowl as she leaned across the table toward Angela, who remained cheerful. Suddenly, Marcy lunged at her, but the guards quickly intervened and escorted Marcy back inside over her protests. Angela glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before leaving the visitors' area. She was still grinning when she got back to the car. "What was that all about?" "Your ex-wife is very sensitive," Angela said with a chuckle. We drove in silence for a while until Angela turned to me. I introduced myself and she seemed pleased to see me. All was well until she realized that I wasn't on her side. I may have misled her a bit at first. "What was that about?" I told her I came from Baltimore to get revenge. She liked that because she thought it was against you. But what I really meant was that I was taking over Tony's business to settle the score. Revenge against a lifeless guy can happen, can't it? But why did it upset her? She wanted details like when, where, and how. Obviously, she meant you. Now I was curious. I told her it would take a long time and asked if she wanted updates. She was all for it and demanded to know my exact plan. When I mentioned how she'd lost, she went completely crazy. It was priceless, all right, so spit it out. How are you going to kill me? I need to hear this. Her grin widened. I told her I would love you to the end. That was it. Yep, pretty funny. I thought she might get mad, but I didn't expect her to freak out like that. We both laughed in silence for a while. I was impressed. When does this start? As soon as we get to the next motel. 2 months later, Angela and I tied the knot in a small backyard ceremony at our new home. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation with a little note inside saying, "The way things are going, he's going to bite the dust in 40 or 50 years.